Hi, I'm Eliot, the IELTS expert at Magoosh, and I'm excited to share this video with you because we're going to focus on IELTS Writing Task 1, really thinking about the essential information you need to know about this task. So all of you out there who are just getting started with your IELTS studies, or even those of you who are pretty familiar with the test, I think there's going to be a lot of really important information in here that you can use to help you study really effectively for this part of the test, and then also to do your best on it. So that's what we're going to focus on here. This is part of a number of videos that we're releasing on our IELTS channel these weeks and months ahead here. So if you like this video after watching it and you want to catch our other ones, make sure to subscribe to the channel and go ahead and like the video if you in YouTube if you enjoyed it and if you found it useful. Okay, but let's dive into our topic here, focusing on IELTS Writing Task 1. Okay, so for all of you who are somewhat unfamiliar with it, if the IELTS studying is new to you, let's talk about the really basic stuff here. So IELTS Writing Task 1 is one of two tasks in the writing section. You have 60 minutes on the writing section on IELTS, and Task 1 is supposed to take you about 20 minutes, okay? Task 2 will take you about 40 minutes. Now, you can divide up your time however you want on the writing section, but it's highly recommended that you divide your time this way because Task 1 is actually worth fewer points than Task 2. It's worth 1/3 of your overall writing grade. Task 2 is worth 2/3, so it's wisest to spend less time on it. And the task itself can be completed in that amount of time. That's the recommendation from IELTS, and the expectation is that you could complete this task in about 20 minutes. Okay, so we're going to talk later in this video about how to kind of use your time and divide up the time, but let's get into some other information about Task 1 here. So what is it that you're supposed to do on this task? Well, you're going to be provided with 1 or 2 visuals. Okay, so these visuals could be something like a map. It could be charts or graphs or tables. There's going to be some factual information provided to you. And there's also going to be, in the question they provide, there's going to be a kind of brief summary of the visuals. So they'll sort of tell you a little bit about what the visuals are about in the question. And your job on Task 1 is to write a report about what you see. You're supposed to summarize the key information that's there, and you're supposed to select details that are important in the visual. So you're supposed to just simply report factually what you see and what's important or significant on the visuals that are presented to you. Okay, so this is quite a bit different than a lot of other writing tasks, and it's very different from Task 2 in the writing section. In Task 2, you are required to give your opinion and present your perspective in a kind of formal 5-paragraph essay. That's a very common writing assignment that you've probably done before. But Task 1 is different from that. You are actually not supposed to present your personal opinion about the topic in Task 1. You are simply supposed to report what you see and what is significant in the visuals, okay? So it's important to omit your personal perspective. It's important to omit any opinions or speculation about what might happen. You know, maybe the visual you have is about is presenting some changes over time, right? Maybe a city, some data about a city and how its temperature or climate has been changing over time, right? It's important to not speculate or guess what's going to happen in the future, right? Because that is your perspective on the data that's there. You are simply supposed to report as best you can what you see and what's important in the data. Okay, so that is one of the very critical things that you'll need to know about for Task 1. All right, now let's talk about how to approach Task 1 questions and what you should do with your time, and also how you should go about formulating your response for Task 1. So it's really important when you are approaching your question on the test, on exam day, when you see your Task 1 question, there's a couple of things you need to do first. All right, first you need to read the short summary in the question of the visuals. Okay, so you should read that over. It's usually a sentence maybe a complicated sentence, but you should spend a little time looking at it and understanding, because it's going to give you really important information about the visual or visuals that are in your question. Okay, so it's going to help you understand what's there. You should then spend some time looking at the visuals themselves. Okay, now Task 1 visuals are not going to be overly complicated. You don't need a lot of specialized knowledge in any particular topic to understand what's there. Okay, but they often are complex enough that you can't just look at it quickly and then start writing. You're going to have to plan to spend a little bit of time on this. I recommend usually spending 2 minutes or so, no more than 3, hopefully, really analyzing the data that's there. You need enough time to write your response, of course. So if the more time you spend analyzing, the less time you have writing. But it is worthwhile to spend a good 2 minutes looking over the data and trying to understand what's there. So you read the summary, then you turn to the visuals. Most of the visuals will have some type of title above them. And so you want to look at that. That helps you understand what's there. Then you want to look down at the visuals themselves. If you've got charts or graphs, you need to analyze the categories in the visuals, the data that's there. Is the chart showing you a trend over time, right? Are there decades presented, like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, right? Or are we looking at maybe something like rainfall totals in a particular area? So you'd be looking at inches or centimeters. You have to really take in what the categories are in the visuals you're looking at so that you can write about them accurately later when you have to write your response. So spend some time just familiarizing yourself with what's there, what the units are, what the data is telling you. And then step 2, and this is going to be really important when you start writing, you need to be thinking about, well, what story is this data telling me, right? What is interesting or significant on these visuals? Okay, so if you're comparing 2 visuals or if you're looking at one, there ought to be some overall trends that you notice, okay? Some patterns in the data. And those patterns are things that you are eventually going to need to write about, okay? So can you identify 1 or 2 or 3 significant patterns in the data that you will eventually write about? That should be your goal. Once you've found those trends or significant pieces of information in the data, that's when you are ready to write your response. So how should you organize your response then? Now that we've analyzed the visuals, what do you do when you need to sit down and start writing? Okay, so let's focus on that. My recommendation for Task 1 responses is that you write a response that has either 3 or 4 paragraphs, and those 3 or 4 paragraphs are divided into 3 basic sections. Okay, so section 1 should be short, okay? No more than 2 or 3 sentences. And this is simply where you introduce the visuals. Okay, so imagine that you had to introduce what you're looking at in your visuals that are presented to you to someone who can't see them, right? Maybe imagine there's somebody behind a curtain and they're not looking at the same thing as you are. So how would you introduce what you're seeing there? So a piece of information that's always critical to this section is the summary sentence that's provided in the question. You're going to want to paraphrase that language often in your first sentence of your introduction, right? Because that is often a nice basic summary of what's presented in your visuals. You also need to mention things like, I'm looking at, or the visual is a chart or a graph or a map or something like that. You need to mention what it is that you're looking at, and it's often useful to describe sort of the units or the measurement that's taking place in the visual you're looking at, all right? Are you looking at a change over time? Are you looking at a total number of something? Whatever it is, that introduction, that very basic introduction needs to happen in that first paragraph. Again, I really think it's a good exercise to imagine you had to write a 3-sentence introduction for your visuals to somebody who isn't looking at the same thing as you. How would you do that? Well, that's your job in that first section, that first paragraph of your response. Then in the next section, you should write another somewhat brief paragraph. I usually recommend 2 to 4 sentences for this one. 4 tends to get a little bit long, but some responses require this, okay? And in this one, this is where you provide a basic summary of the important information. You remember when we were talking earlier in the video about how you were trying to find those 2 or 3 really important trends or the significant data, the thing that's interesting or important about the visuals you're looking at. Well, in the second paragraph, that's where you want to describe those important or significant things in general terms, okay? So you would say something like, overall, these charts or this map shows what, and then you in general try to summarize what those key bits are, okay? This kind of provides the story. You're trying to identify what story is the data, are these visuals telling? And in paragraph 2, you're trying to define that story. You're trying to summarize it. Okay, and so you're not getting into any data at this point. You're not, if your visuals have numbers or a lot of details, which they almost always do, you want to leave those out. This ought to be just an overall summary of what you see in the visuals and the critical information that's there. Okay, then in section 3, which could be 2 paragraphs or just 1, right? It depends. You'll have to make choices about what's appropriate based on the visuals you see there and how much you have to say about it. But here's where you unpack and provide data about what you said in paragraph 2. So you told the overall story in paragraph 2. Now you're supposed to go in and select data from the visuals that support or provide more detailed information about those big trends that you pulled out in paragraph 2. So here's where you select those numbers, you select those trends or the key things that you found in the visuals, and you simply present the numbers, the details about them, okay? So if you have selected let's say 2 really important trends or significant pieces of data from your visuals that you identified in your summary paragraph, then it would make sense to me to spend 1 short paragraph writing about one of those trends and give that data some focus in that 1 paragraph, and then move on to a 4th paragraph where you spend a little more time adding detail about that second major trend that you noticed in your visual. Okay, you want to provide as much relevant data there as you possibly can. Now, if you have time, you may write a conclusion sentence or 2 at the end, but that piece of it isn't extremely critical for this exercise. If you don't get to that, if you don't write a summary sort of providing another sort of overview of what your visuals were about, that's not really going to damage your score at all. It's not going to bring it down. It can be a nice addition there, but it's not necessary. And in fact, I often recommend instead of that, taking a little bit of time at the end to read over what you wrote, make sure you catch any grammar errors or vocabulary errors. That's going to be a much bigger impact on your score than it would be if you happen to not include that sort of summary sentence or conclusion at the end. Okay, so save a little time if possible, but many students that I work with don't have a lot of time at the end because 20 minutes goes by very, very fast when you're writing your task 1 responses. Okay, so that's some of the essential information you should have. If you want more information about IELTS Writing Task 1, check out some of the resources we have down in the description. We've got some great stuff with a lot more detail about Task 1 and how to write responses. There are even some sample essays in our guide to IELTS Writing Task 1 that you see down below. And so that will give you a much more concrete view of some of the very theoretical sort of things we're talking about in this video. So make sure to go check those out. And while you're at it, go check out Magoosh IELTS as well. Magoosh is an online learning resource that you can use to prepare for IELTS. We've got lots of great features on our site that help students do as well as they possibly can on the difficult test, right? We've got practice questions, we've got lesson videos, we have recently released a new speaking grading feature, so we'll grade some of your interviews, practice interviews, and give you a sense of what your score would be. We also have live classes that we released recently, a lot of exciting stuff. So make sure to check that out. And again, as I said at the beginning, if you like these videos and you want to catch our upcoming videos that will come out soon, make sure to just subscribe to our channel so that you can get those videos when they release. All right, thanks for tuning in here on our video about Task 1, and we'll see you in the next videos.